Remember, Naomi is weeping with her daughters-in-law. She has just tried to send them away from her. She realizes that she can provide them no protection. She can provide them no security, and it's better for Naomi and Naomi's mind to send them off to a better possible future than to try to hold on to them. This is how the story continues in the first chapter, verse 10. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they have grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me." Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. So the two of them went until they came to Bethlehem. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" And she said to them, "Call me no longer Naomi. Call me Mara," a word that means bitter. "For the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi, when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So Naomi returned together with Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, who came back with her from the country of Moab. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Last week, we traveled through the book of Judges, where we learned this story takes place. It says in the first verse of the first chapter, the days when judges ruled. And these two books cannot read more differently. Let's think about it this way. The book of Judges is like the big umbrella of news cycles of a given place at a given year. All the crazy things that happen on this really large scale. And then the book of Ruth is a regular family living under that umbrella, just trying to go about life normally. And they do have a pretty normal life. Yes, they experience the loss and tragedy of their loved ones. It's also not uncommon in that time and place especially. So Judges is sensational and epic, and Ruth is subtle and rich. And Ruth is such a good story that I'm not going to give anything away. I'm going to keep us in the tensions of this first chapter. I want you to read it. It's 4 chapters long. We're supposed to be reading the Bible together through an entire year, and Ruth is the most accessible book that we've gotten to at this point. And so I'm going to keep us in the first chapter. If you want to see how this story unfolds, which unfolds in wonderful ways, that's something y'all can do when you get home today or sometime this week. Read those extra 3 chapters. So we're going to remain in the tension of this first chapter. In the children's message, I talked about vulnerability and the vulnerability of these women and how that patriarchal society of that time left women so vulnerable when they were disconnected from men of the family. And so when Naomi's husband died and when Naomi's 2 sons died, these 3 women were left in a very precarious position. They had no safety net. They had no one to call them theirs, and so they had no power, and they had very little latitude of choice. Naomi is telling her daughters-in-law to go back to Moab. You are young enough. You could remarry. You could find security in a man in Moab. And we see Orpah make that decision. We see the tension there. Orpah doesn't want to, but when faced with her own survival, she makes the unbearably difficult choice to leave her family to try to survive. And I don't think Orpah is being selfish or heartless. I think she's faced with incredibly difficult decisions, and she thinks that that's the right decision for her in that moment. And then there's Ruth, who could have feasibly taken the exact same path as Orpah. She could have gone back to Moab, found a husband, found that security in her home country, which is objectively the safer road. That would have been the prudent decision. But she decides to stick it out with Naomi. And she says, "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and that's where I'll be buried." What words come to mind when you think of Ruth in this moment? What words? What is Ruth like? Courageous. Brave, loyal, faithful. All those sound good, and really, any of those words fit into this word that I'll use. I chose a particular descriptor. It's a word that we often see in the Bible. It's steadfast. I think Ruth is steadfast. And that means, or we read, God's steadfast love endures forever. We see some formulation of that phrase like 50 times in Scripture. Just to be steadfast is to be resolute, unwavering, firm. Indeed, that is true of God's love, and it is also true of the faithful Moabite woman that we call Ruth. Do you feel like it's easy to be steadfast about much of anything right now? I don't feel that way. Here's a euphemism for how I've been experiencing the world lately. Bennett, my son, who's almost 1.5, learned to walk a few months ago. And he's kind of bad at it. He's not a strong walker. He's fine. He gets from A to B, but he is so unbalanced when he walks. And it's changing all the time. It seems like every day he tries on a new walk, equally bad, so much so that McKay and I have given names to his walks. He has the pterodactyl, and he walks around, flapping his arms, screeching as he goes. That's not the way to steadily walk towards a direction. He does the manager, where he puts his hands behind his back like he's criticizing things. This one is especially difficult to get behind, because if he falls, he's got nothing to break his fall. He also started walking backwards a couple days ago. And what are you doing, son? I just feel like, gosh, you're just asking, begging for these falls. It stresses me out. He is the most unsteadfast walker. And it makes me feel just how unsteadfast the world is. That's my experience of the world lately. Politics, pandemics, war on the large scale. Doubt, distrust, and worry on the smaller scale. It's tough to feel very solid about much of anything right now. Or I think it's fair to say that there's many of us who've been traveling through some really shaky seasons in the past couple years. So where can we find a sturdy foundation? What can we rely on that doesn't feel so unsteady? How does Ruth do it? How does Ruth, this Moabite woman, detached from any of the security of men, moving towards so many uncertainties, become so steadfast? Well, first, I think she just tries to take the right next step. She tries to take the right next step. She doesn't have all the answers. She has no idea how so many things are going to unfold, and so she tries to just take the right next step. Her husband has died alongside her brothers-in-law and her father-in-law. And as they're contending with this collective grief, Ruth just tries to take the right next step, which for her is sticking by Naomi's side. I think Orpah is trying to do the same thing. And for Orpah, that looked like leaving. But for Ruth, her best sense of the situation was to take the right next step towards Naomi. It was valuing family and trusting that she would find a way through all of this. It was heading back to Bethlehem in search of opportunities, despite not knowing how those opportunities might unfold or not. And there's more right next steps that Ruth takes, but you're going to have to read about that on your own. Chapters 2 through 4 are many more right next steps for Ruth, but y'all can handle that. I think the next steadfast thing Ruth does is chooses abundant empathy. But I don't even think that is the right phrasing. I don't think empathy captures all that Ruth does. She chooses to sit in the grief and the challenge and the burden with Naomi. It's not that she just feels for Naomi. She decides to put herself in the midst of that chaos. Ruth becomes the unwavering buoy that holds Naomi up throughout all of the waves of devastation that surrounds her. I think sometimes just jumping into that chaos, when we are able to tether ourselves to those who are drowning, that actually helps us solidify both of us. Not having all the right answers, not knowing what to do or what to say, but just being with the person, and often that is being in suffering alongside each other, is enough to stabilize all of us. Ruth decides that she will throw her lot in with Naomi in every way, including taking on Naomi's faith for her own. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. This is not a whim. Ruth hasn't decided, oh, well, that just makes sense. Ruth has been exposed, understands what this faith is. She's been married to this family. She's been a part of these customs for at least 10 years. And so faith begins to grow into her own. Her decisions here actually speaks to that growing faith. And I think one of the reasons she decides to actually stick with Naomi in the first place is because that faith has moved her in that direction. She has a sense of who Yahweh is, the God of Israel. She has a sense of the stories of those people, and she is gripped and has a sense that God will bring them through this. That is not a large feature to the book to this book as a whole. What is said about God and what we see as actions of God are really minimized in Ruth. It's one of the few books in the Bible where we see very little of God interacting, God speaking, or speaking about God. It's much more about Ruth's faithfulness. Don't miss how impressive that faith is. She's so courageous, she's so brave, she's steadfast, and her faith is growing. And as you will see in the story as it unfolds, it gives her more momentum to take that right next step. Friends, that's really all I have for us this morning. It's not an extensive or complicated message because the story of Ruth is not an extensive or complicated story. Ruth took the right next steps. She empathized, inserted herself into Naomi's world, and she put her trust in the God of Israel. And in those three things, there's culmination of firmness. Ruth becomes more steadfast as those things start to converge in and out of each other. Okay, I'll give you a little taste of what's to come in the larger story of Ruth. This is what we read towards the end. Remember when Naomi said, "Call me no longer Naomi, call me Mara." That's how she comes into Bethlehem, saying, "Call me bitter." This is what the community will end up saying about Naomi. "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him." You'll still need to read the story. If you want to embrace this larger, beautiful context, you're going to need to read the story. But know this, the Lord provides. God is faithful just as Ruth is faithful. And this provision and faithfulness continues to be our experience today as we gather around this table.